"Don't look at me like that," the nun said. The mountain man kept staring. And then he had a wife. Sister Maria walked slowly through the small village, her hands folded in front of her. The cold wind of early morning brushed against her face, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. She had lived here for nearly 10 years, serving quietly in the little church at the edge of the village. Most days were peaceful. Children ran through the streets. Merchants set up their stalls, and the villagers greeted her with smiles and gentle nods. Maria liked the calmness of her life. She enjoyed helping others and found comfort in her routines. She rose early, tended the garden, helped feed the poor, and guided those who came seeking advice. Her days were simple but meaningful, and she was content with that. One morning, something unusual broke the calm. From the path that led down the mountain, a figure appeared. At first, Maria thought it was a traveler passing through, but as he came closer, she noticed how different he looked from the villagers. He was tall and broad, with clothes patched in places, showing years of use. His boots were worn and caked with mud, and his hair was long and tangled, as if he had not had a proper haircut in months. His eyes, dark and searching, scanned the village as though he were trying to understand a world he had rarely seen. He stopped near the church and looked around, finally resting his gaze on Maria. She felt an immediate awareness of being watched. The stare was intense, almost too personal, and it made her step back slightly. She had seen travelers before, but there was something different about this man. He was not just curious. He seemed captivated, almost studying her, and it made her heart beat a little faster with a mix of caution and curiosity. She wanted to tell him to stop staring, but the words did not come at first. Instead, she took a deep breath and said, "Don't look at me like that." The man blinked, as if he had just realized he had been staring. A slight flush appeared on his cheeks. He nodded quietly, his expression showing a mix of embarrassment and intrigue. Maria turned away, trying to hide the tiny smile that had appeared despite herself. There was something strange about him, something that made her feel nervous and curious at the same time. She went inside the church, closing the door softly behind her, but she could not help noticing him still standing there, watching the church doors. Over the next few days, the man, whose name Maria would later learn was Daniel, appeared often. He did not speak much at first. He would simply walk along the village paths, sometimes stopping near the church or the market, always keeping his distance. The villagers whispered about him. They had never seen someone like Daniel before, someone who looked like he belonged more to the mountains than to the village. Some found him frightening. Others found him mysterious. Maria, however, felt a mixture of fear and fascination. She could not explain why she kept thinking about him even when she tried to focus on her duties. One afternoon, Maria was helping an elderly woman carry firewood to her small cottage when she noticed Daniel struggling with a large bundle of logs near the edge of the forest. He was strong, but the logs were heavy, and he seemed unsure how to carry them without dropping them. Maria approached him carefully. "Do you need help?" she asked. Daniel looked up, surprised that someone had spoken to him. For a moment he hesitated, as if unsure if he could trust her. Then he nodded, handing over one of the logs. Together, they carried the firewood to the woman's cottage. During that short walk, Daniel did not speak much, but his eyes occasionally met hers. There was a quiet understanding between them, a connection that Maria could not explain. She had never met someone so different from the villagers, yet so present and aware of the world around him. When they reached the cottage, the woman thanked them warmly, and Maria noticed the small smile on Daniel's face. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and it made her heart lift slightly. The next few days brought more small encounters. Daniel began helping with small tasks in the village. He repaired broken fences, carried water for the villagers, and even helped tend the small gardens near the church. Maria watched him from a distance at first, studying the careful way he worked. He was not careless or rough. He seemed to respect the land and the people around him. The villagers began to warm to him slowly, seeing that beneath the rugged exterior he had a gentle and hard-working nature. Maria, meanwhile, struggled with her feelings. She had never been close to a man outside the church before, and Daniel's presence stirred emotions she did not fully understand. She found herself thinking about him more than she wanted to. She noticed the way he paused to look at the clouds, the way he smiled at small animals, the way he sometimes hummed quietly while working. There was something innocent and sincere about him that drew her in, even as she reminded herself that she was devoted to her life of service. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Daniel came to the church again. Maria was inside, arranging flowers near the altar. He stood at the door for a moment, hesitating, and then stepped inside quietly. "I wanted to see you," he said simply. His voice was low but steady. Maria turned, startled by the directness of his words. She felt her face warm. "Why?" she asked softly. Daniel shrugged, looking around at the quiet room. "I don't know. You seem different, peaceful." He paused, then added, "I've never met anyone like you." Maria felt a strange mix of emotions: embarrassment, curiosity, and a sense of something growing between them that she did not yet understand. She wanted to ask him more, to understand why he was here, but instead, she simply nodded. "The church is open to all," she said. Her voice was calm, but inside her heart was racing. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's visits became a part of the rhythm of the village. He worked alongside the villagers during the day and often stayed near the church in the evenings. Sometimes he would help Maria tend to the small garden behind the church. They worked side by side in silence. Yet the silence was not uncomfortable. It was filled with a quiet understanding, a connection that neither could put into words. Maria began to notice small changes in herself. She looked forward to seeing Daniel each day. She felt a warmth when he smiled, a comfort when he was near. She knew that her feelings were growing, and she also knew that she had to be careful. The villagers watched closely, and her life had been one of discipline and service. She could not allow herself to act impulsively, but she also could not ignore the gentle pull of curiosity and affection that Daniel inspired. For Daniel, the change was even more profound. He had lived most of his life alone, trusting no one and relying only on his own skills to survive in the mountains. Yet, in Maria's presence, he felt a strange sense of belonging. He wanted to know her better, to be near her, and to understand the quiet strength she carried. He found himself thinking about her during the nights he spent by his small cabin, wondering what her day had been like, and imagining the sound of her laughter. One morning, a small accident brought them even closer. A young boy had climbed too high in a tree and could not get down. Daniel, quick and careful, climbed up and helped the boy down safely. Maria watched with relief and admiration. When Daniel handed the boy to her, their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither looked away. There was a silent understanding between them, a recognition of each other's humanity and care. Maria felt her chest tighten with emotions she could not name, and Daniel felt a warmth in his heart that he had never experienced before. By the time the first month passed, the villagers had grown used to Daniel's presence, and Maria had grown used to her own feelings. They had not spoken much about the strange connection forming between them, but it was undeniable. Each glance, each small act of kindness, each shared moment built a quiet bond. Maria knew that the coming days would challenge her in ways she had never imagined, and Daniel sensed that his life was slowly changing in ways he had never expected. And so their story began, not with words, but with glances, small acts, and a quiet understanding. The mountain man and the nun had found each other in the simplest yet most profound way, and neither of them knew how their lives would unfold, but both could feel that something extraordinary was quietly starting to grow. The days passed slowly in the small village, but each day felt different for Sister Maria and Daniel. Their connection was growing quietly, like a small plant sprouting in hidden soil. Daniel worked alongside the villagers, lifting heavy bundles of hay, repairing fences, and carrying water from the stream. His hands were rough and calloused, but his movements were careful, deliberate. He was strong, but he had a gentle way of handling the work. Maria watched him sometimes from a distance, noticing how he helped without complaint, always giving his full attention to what he was doing. Another spot. One morning, Maria was tending the church garden, planting flowers that would bloom in spring. The cold air made her fingers stiff, and she felt the familiar ache in her back from bending over too long. Daniel appeared quietly behind her, carrying a small basket of fresh vegetables he had picked from the mountains. "I thought you might like these," he said softly. Maria turned, surprised. The warmth in his voice made her chest feel tight. "Thank you," she replied, taking the basket. His eyes lingered on hers for a moment, and she looked away quickly, feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and curiosity. Over the next few days, Daniel began stopping by the church more often. He did not always speak. Sometimes he would sit nearby and watch Maria work. Other times he would help her with chores, sweeping the floors, carrying water, or lifting heavy objects she could not manage alone. The villagers noticed the change in Maria. She smiled more, walked with a lighter step, and seemed to carry a new energy. Daniel, too, felt different. He was used to solitude and silence, but in Maria's presence, he felt alive in a way he had never known. One afternoon, a group of children gathered near the church to play. Daniel and Maria were outside tending the garden when a young boy tripped and fell, scraping his knee. Maria rushed to him, kneeling beside the child to clean the wound. Daniel stayed close, watching her every move. "Here, let me help," he said, picking up a cloth and gently handing it to her. The boy looked up at him with wide eyes, then smiled when Daniel helped him stand. Maria watched Daniel's careful, considerate actions, and her heart swelled with a mixture of admiration and something deeper she could not name. Daniel himself began to notice small changes in his own behavior. He found himself thinking about Maria even when he was alone, wondering what she was doing, and hoping to see her again. He had always been independent, relying only on himself, but now he felt a strange desire to be near her, to share in her world. For the first time in years, he wanted to belong somewhere, to be part of a community that accepted him despite his rough appearance and quiet ways. Maria, in turn, noticed that Daniel seemed to soften when he was around her. He smiled more often, laughed quietly at small jokes, and sometimes looked at her with eyes that held a depth of feeling he had never shown anyone before. One day, Maria asked Daniel to help her deliver a basket of food to an elderly widow on the edge of the village. They walked together along the narrow paths, the mountains rising steeply around them. Daniel carried the basket easily, balancing it on his shoulder, and Maria walked beside him, feeling a strange comfort in his presence. "You always help everyone," she said softly. Daniel shrugged, looking ahead. "I like to help. It feels right." Maria smiled, sensing a quiet honesty in his words. For a moment they walked in silence, the wind carrying the scent of pine and earth, and both felt a sense of peace that was rare in their lives. As they reached the widow's small cottage, Daniel carefully placed the basket on the table. The woman, frail but kind, looked up and smiled. "Thank you both," she said. "You are a blessing." Maria glanced at Daniel, noticing how his face softened at the woman's words. He nodded quietly, but there was a light in his eyes that Maria could not ignore. She realized that his strength was not just in his muscles, but in the quiet way he cared for others. In the evenings, Daniel sometimes helped Maria in the church. They would light candles together, sweep the floors, or prepare small meals for those in need. The routine was simple, yet in those quiet moments, they began to understand each other without words. Maria learned that Daniel had spent most of his life in the mountains, alone. He had survived harsh winters, difficult terrain, and long periods of isolation. Yet, despite the hardships, he was kind, thoughtful, and deeply observant. Daniel, in turn, learned about Maria's life in the village, her devotion to her work, and her quiet compassion for everyone around her. There were times when Maria felt conflicted. She had devoted her life to service and discipline, and she knew her feelings for Daniel were growing beyond simple friendship. She worried about what others might think and what it meant for her life in the village. Yet when she looked at him, she felt a warmth she could not deny, a connection that was both surprising and comforting. Daniel, too, felt the weight of his emotions. He was unaccustomed to trusting anyone, yet he found himself opening his heart to Maria in ways he had never imagined. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept through the village. Rain poured down, turning paths into streams, and the wind howled through the trees. Daniel immediately rushed to help secure the church doors and windows. Maria joined him, carrying extra cloths and candles to protect the interior. They worked side by side, shouting over the wind to communicate, their hands brushing occasionally as they moved quickly. For the first time, Maria noticed how Daniel's presence made her feel safe, even in the midst of the storm. Daniel, too, realized that he had never felt such a connection with anyone before. After the storm passed, the village emerged to assess the damage. Daniel and Maria helped the villagers repair broken fences, collect fallen branches, and tend to the flooded gardens. The work was tiring, but it brought them closer together. Maria laughed quietly as Daniel struggled with a stubborn branch, and Daniel smiled at her gentle teasing. The villagers began to whisper that the two of them seemed different when they were together, as if their presence strengthened each other. Maria felt a small surge of hope. Perhaps her feelings were not wrong. Perhaps there was a place in life where her heart and her purpose could meet. By the time spring arrived, Daniel had become a familiar figure in the village. Children ran to him for help. Women smiled at him in gratitude, and Maria found herself thinking about him constantly. She noticed the way he would pause to watch the sunrise, the way he helped the smallest creatures with care, and the quiet way he treated everyone with respect. Daniel, in turn, noticed Maria's dedication, her kindness, and the way she seemed to see the good in everyone. Their relationship was still unspoken, but the bond between them had grown strong and undeniable. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Daniel approached Maria while she was tending the church garden. He handed her a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked from the mountains. "I thought you might like these," he said softly. Maria accepted them, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she realized that her life, once so predictable and simple, was changing. Daniel had become more than a stranger or a helper. He had become someone who mattered deeply to her, and she mattered to him in return. Their connection continued to grow, quietly but steadily. They shared small smiles, fleeting glances, and moments of silent understanding. Each day brought new opportunities to see the goodness in each other, to feel the warmth of trust and respect. Maria began to understand that love was not always loud or dramatic. It could be gentle, patient, and steady, growing in small ways until it became undeniable. Daniel felt the same. For the first time, he felt that life could be more than survival in the mountains. It could be shared, meaningful, and full of quiet joy. By the end of the season, Maria and Daniel had formed a bond that neither could ignore. It was built on trust, kindness, and shared moments, small but powerful. Both knew that challenges lay ahead, that their feelings might not be easy to navigate, but they also knew that the connection they had found was rare and worth nurturing. The mountain man and the nun had begun a journey together, one that promised discovery, growth, and the possibility of a future neither had dared to imagine before. Spring had fully arrived in the village, and the mountains around it were alive with green and color. The streams gurgled with melted snow, flowers bloomed along the paths, and birds filled the mornings with cheerful songs. Maria spent her days in the church and garden helping villagers with small tasks, while Daniel continued to assist wherever he could. Their bond had grown stronger, though they had not spoken about it directly. Each glance, each small act of kindness had built a quiet understanding between them. One day, a letter arrived at the church from a neighboring town. The priest had fallen ill, and the villagers had been asked to send someone to help for a few weeks. Maria knew she could not go herself, as she needed to remain with the village and the people who relied on her. But Daniel, who had never traveled far from the mountains, looked at the letter curiously. "I could go," he said slowly, "if it would help." Maria was surprised. He had always lived a life of solitude and distance, yet now he considered leaving the safety of his home to help others. "Are you sure?" she asked. He nodded, his eyes steady. "I've never done it before, but I want to try." Before he left, Maria and Daniel spent time preparing supplies for the journey. They packed food, blankets, and small tools in a wooden cart. As they worked, there were long moments of silence, but it was comfortable. Maria noticed how Daniel's hands moved carefully over each item, how he seemed to think about each choice he made. "You always pay attention to details," she said softly. Daniel looked at her, and a small smile appeared. "I've learned that the little things matter," he replied. Their eyes met for a long moment, and Maria felt her heart tighten. She had begun to realize that Daniel was no longer just a helper in the village. He had become someone very important to her life. Before he left, the villagers gathered to see him off. Children clung to his arms, women offered baked goods, and elderly men nodded with respect. Maria stood slightly apart, holding a small bouquet of flowers she had picked that morning. "Be careful," she whispered as he approached. Daniel took the flowers and held them carefully. "I will," he said quietly. Then, without another word, he began walking toward the path that led to the neighboring town. Maria watched him go, feeling a mix of pride, worry, and longing she did not fully understand. While Daniel was away, Maria continued her work in the village. She noticed how much his presence had filled the quiet spaces of her days. Without him nearby, there was a sense of emptiness she could not ignore. Yet, she also felt a deep respect for his courage and independence. Daniel had left the mountains, stepping into the unknown, simply because he wanted to help. That thought brought her comfort and admiration. She began to understand more clearly why she had been drawn to him. It was not only his strength, but his heart, his willingness to step into the world with kindness that mattered most. Meanwhile, Daniel faced challenges he had never imagined. The neighboring town was larger than his mountain home, with crowded streets, busy markets, and people who moved quickly and spoke loudly. At first, he felt overwhelmed. He was used to the quiet of the mountains, the rhythm of his own life, and the slow pace of the village. Yet, as he began to work with the priest and the townspeople, he found his confidence growing. He repaired broken doors, carried supplies, and helped prepare meals. Each small task gave him a sense of purpose, and he discovered that his skills and careful attention were valued. During his stay, Daniel received letters from Maria. They were simple, written in her careful hand, describing the life of the village, small stories of children playing, and the way the seasons were changing. Each letter was a window into the world he had left behind, and reading them brought a warmth to his heart. He began to realize that he missed not only the village, but Maria herself. He longed to see her again, to share the quiet moments and small joys they had once taken for granted. The letters reminded him that the connection between them was more than a passing curiosity. It was something real, something he could not ignore. After several weeks, Daniel returned to the village. He came back with stories of the town, the people he had met, and the work he had done. Maria was waiting at the edge of the village, holding the same kind of wild flowers she had given him before he left. When she saw him, her heart lifted, and for a moment they simply stood together, taking in the sight of each other. Daniel approached carefully, holding out his hands to take the flowers. "For you," he said softly. Maria smiled, feeling a deep warmth in her chest. "Welcome back," she replied. Life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, but something had shifted between them. The experiences of separation had strengthened their bond. Daniel was no longer just a strong helper. He had shown courage, determination, and a willingness to face the unknown. Maria, too, had recognized her own feelings and the importance of human connection beyond duty and routine. Together, they began to understand that their lives, once separate and predictable, were now intertwined in ways that could not be undone. One afternoon, while they worked in the church garden, a sudden accident occurred. A young boy had climbed a tall tree to retrieve a bird's nest, but had slipped, hanging dangerously by a branch. Maria cried out in alarm, and Daniel sprang into action. Without hesitation, he ran to the tree, climbed carefully, and grabbed the boy's small hands. The branch cracked slightly under his weight, but Daniel held on, using every ounce of his strength to pull the child to safety. Maria watched, her hands pressed to her mouth, her heart pounding with fear and relief. When Daniel finally lowered the boy to the ground, the child ran to his mother, laughing nervously but unharmed. Maria ran to Daniel, her face flushed with emotion. You saved him," she said, her voice trembling. Daniel looked at her, sweat dripping from his brow, and smiled gently. "He's safe. That's what matters," he said simply. Maria felt a mix of admiration, relief, and a strange warmth toward him she could not fully explain. In that moment, she realized that Daniel's strength was not just physical, but also moral and emotional. He cared deeply for others, and his courage inspired her. The villagers were amazed by Daniel's actions, but Maria noticed a subtle change in him. He seemed more confident, more aware of his place in the village, and more comfortable with the bond growing between them. She also realized that her own feelings had become impossible to ignore. Every glance he gave her, every small gesture of kindness, made her heart beat faster. She began to wonder if their connection could grow into something deeper, something that went beyond friendship and quiet admiration. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Maria and Daniel walked together along the village paths. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was filled with the scent of flowers and fresh earth. They spoke quietly, sharing stories of their pasts and hopes for the future. Maria learned more about Daniel's life in the mountains, the challenges he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. Daniel, in turn, listened to her experiences, the small joys and struggles of living in the village. For the first time, they spoke openly about their feelings. Daniel admitted that he had never known such warmth and understanding before. Maria confessed that she had begun to feel a connection that went beyond simple friendship. There were no dramatic declarations, no overwhelming passion, only honesty, respect, and a quiet understanding of what they meant to each other. That evening, as they parted ways for the night, both felt a sense of hope and anticipation. Their bond had grown stronger, and they both knew that the coming days would test it in ways they could not yet imagine. By the end of Part 3, Daniel and Maria had faced challenges, demonstrated courage, and begun to openly recognize their feelings. Their connection was no longer hidden behind glances or small acts. It had become a mutual understanding that would guide the next stages of their journey. The village watched quietly, sensing the deepening bond, while the mountains stood as silent witnesses to the start of something extraordinary. Summer had settled over the village, painting the fields in gold and green. The sun rose early and set late, and the days were long and filled with activity. Maria and Daniel had grown even closer since his return from the neighboring town. Their bond was no longer quiet or hidden. It was visible in the way they worked together, laughed together, and supported each other. Yet, beneath the calm surface, both felt the weight of unspoken questions. How far could their connection go? What would it mean for their lives and their responsibilities? One morning, as Maria was tending the garden behind the church, Daniel approached, carrying a basket of freshly picked fruit. He smiled at her, a warm, easy smile that made her heart flutter. "I thought these might brighten your day," he said. Maria took the basket and looked up at him. "You always think of others," she said softly. Daniel shrugged, a faint blush on his cheeks. "I just care," he replied quietly. They worked together in silence, arranging the fruit, watering the plants, and enjoying the simple rhythm of the day. Later that afternoon, a messenger arrived in the village with urgent news. A heavy storm had hit a neighboring valley, causing damage to homes and crops. Some villagers needed help, and a group was being organized to provide assistance. Maria felt a tug at her heart. She knew the village needed her, but she also knew Daniel's strength and experience could be of great help. "You should go," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You can make a real difference." Daniel hesitated, looking at her with those deep, steady eyes. "I will, but I will return as soon as I can," he promised. The journey to the valley was long and difficult. The rain had turned the paths into slippery mud, and fallen branches blocked the way. Daniel moved carefully, using his experience in the mountains to navigate the treacherous terrain. Along the way, he encountered villagers from the affected area, frightened and uncertain. He offered them calm words, helped them carry supplies, and showed a quiet confidence that inspired trust. Maria had never seen him like this before. Strong, capable, and compassionate in ways that went far beyond simple labor. Meanwhile, back in the village, Maria felt the absence of Daniel keenly. Each task she performed seemed heavier without his presence. She tended the church garden, cared for the children, and helped the elderly. But her mind kept wandering to Daniel. Was he safe? Was he managing the challenges in the valley? She realized with a mix of fear and longing how deeply she had come to care for him. Her heart had moved beyond simple admiration or friendship. She worried about his safety, thought about his comfort, and hoped for his return every day. Daniel's days in the neighboring valley were exhausting but fulfilling. He helped repair homes, rebuild fences, and distribute food to families whose lives had been disrupted by the storm. He worked tirelessly, sometimes from sunrise to sunset, yet never complained. In the evenings he would rest briefly, thinking of Maria, imagining her smile, her quiet strength, and the way she had encouraged him to step beyond his comfort zone. The thought of her gave him energy and hope, even when his muscles ached and the work seemed endless. After nearly a week, Daniel returned to the village, weary but satisfied with what he had accomplished. Maria ran to meet him at the edge of the path, her heart racing. "You came back safely," she said, relief evident in her voice. Daniel smiled, exhausted but content. "I promised I would," he replied. The villagers watched the reunion, noticing the unspoken connection between them. It was not just relief. They could see the depth of understanding, trust, and affection that had grown over the months. That evening, as they walked together along the quiet paths of the village, Daniel spoke for the first time about his feelings. "Maria, I've never known life like this," he began, his voice steady but soft. "I've spent years alone surviving, but never really living. You've shown me what it means to care, to be part of a world where people matter to each other." Maria listened quietly, her heart swelling with emotion. "I feel the same," she admitted. "I never expected to feel this way, but being with you, it feels right." Their words marked a turning point. No longer was their connection a quiet understanding. It had become an acknowledgement of their mutual care and affection. Yet both knew that the path ahead would not be simple. Maria had devoted much of her life to the church, to service, and discipline. Daniel had spent his life in solitude, learning to rely only on himself. They were from different worlds, and the challenges of blending their lives were real. But for the first time, they both felt ready to face them together. Over the next few days, they spent more time together, discussing practical matters, sharing stories, and helping the villagers. They laughed easily, worked seamlessly as a team, and shared quiet moments that spoke more than words ever could. Maria noticed how Daniel's eyes softened when he looked at her, how his actions were filled with thoughtfulness and care. Daniel noticed Maria's strength, patience, and the way she treated everyone with respect and love. Each small interaction deepened their bond and strengthened their trust. One afternoon, while repairing a damaged fence at the edge of the village, Daniel slipped on a loose plank and fell, twisting his ankle. Maria rushed to his side, helping him to sit and examining the injury. "It's not too bad," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "We'll wrap it and keep it elevated. You need to rest." Daniel gritted his teeth but smiled at her concern. "Thank you," he said simply. Maria helped him back to his cabin, her hands steady as she guided him carefully. That evening, as she tended to his injury, Daniel realized how deeply he relied on her care, not just physically, but emotionally as well. The incident made both of them aware of their dependence on each other. Maria had grown to trust Daniel's strength, judgment, and kindness. Daniel had come to rely on Maria's support, guidance, and presence. They understood that their connection was more than attraction. It was a partnership built on respect, care, and shared experience. This realization brought a sense of clarity, but also a recognition that decisions about the future could not be delayed. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Maria and Daniel sat quietly outside the church. The air was warm and filled with the scent of flowers. Daniel took a deep breath. "Maria, I know life is complicated," he said, "but I want to be part of yours, if you'll let me. I want to share your days, help you, and stand beside you." Maria looked into his eyes, seeing the honesty and depth of his words. "I want that too," she replied softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. That night, as they walked back toward their respective homes, both felt a profound sense of hope and anticipation. Their bond had grown through shared labor, small acts of kindness, and the challenges they had faced together. The turning point had come, not through dramatic events, but through courage, care, and the quiet acknowledgement of feelings that had grown over time. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but for the first time, they felt ready to face them together. By the end of Part 4, Daniel and Maria had reached a critical moment in their journey. Their feelings were no longer hidden or tentative. They were recognized and acknowledged. They had faced challenges, shown courage, and built trust through action and care. The village had witnessed their growth, and the mountains stood as silent witnesses to the bond forming between them. Both knew that their lives were changing in ways that could not be undone, and that the future held possibilities neither had dared to imagine before. The summer sun shone brightly over the village, warming the fields and casting golden light over the mountains. Maria and Daniel had grown even closer since their turning point. Their bond was no longer quiet or tentative. It had become a steady presence in both their lives. They worked together in the garden, helped villagers with chores, and shared quiet moments that felt like treasures. Yet both knew that the next steps would require courage, planning, and honesty about the life they wanted together. One morning, Maria walked along the village path, carrying water to the small garden behind the church. Daniel followed, carrying a basket of freshly harvested vegetables. They smiled at each other, the warmth of their connection obvious in the gentle way they moved together. "I never imagined life could feel like this," Daniel said softly, glancing at Maria. "I thought I would always be alone in the mountains." Maria looked up at him, her eyes shining. "And I never imagined that someone like you could touch my life," she replied. "But you have, and I am glad." Over the next few days, they began discussing the future more seriously. Maria knew that her life in the convent had prepared her for discipline and service, but it had not prepared her for love or companionship. Daniel had spent most of his life in solitude, relying only on himself, and the idea of sharing his life with someone was both exciting and daunting. Yet together they realized that their differences could be a source of strength. Daniel's experience with survival, courage, and patience complemented Maria's kindness, organization, and wisdom. One afternoon, they visited the village elder, a kind woman who had watched their bond grow. Maria explained her feelings honestly. "I care for Daniel deeply," she said. "I believe we can build a life together, but I want guidance. I do not wish to make mistakes." The elder listened, nodding thoughtfully. "Love is not always easy," she said gently, "but it is real when it grows from respect, care, and shared experience. You have both shown these qualities. Trust your hearts, and your path will become clear." Maria and Daniel left her home feeling reassured and more determined. As the days passed, the villagers became more aware of the bond between Maria and Daniel. They noticed the quiet ways they supported each other, the gentle glances, the small gestures of care. Children ran to Daniel for help with small chores, while women asked Maria for guidance and advice. The village accepted them not just as individuals, but as a team, a pair whose partnership strengthened the community. This acceptance gave Maria and Daniel a sense of confidence and hope for the life they could build together. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the mountains, Daniel invited Maria to walk with him along a trail he had often explored alone. They climbed to a small hill that overlooked the village, the view breathtaking. The golden sunlight bathed the village in warmth, and the mountains stood tall and quiet around them. Daniel turned to Maria, taking her hand in his. "I want to be with you," he said quietly, "not just today, but for every day after this. Will you share your life with me?" Maria felt tears welling in her eyes.
"Yes,"
she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. I want that too. With their commitment to each other clear, they began to plan a life together. They decided to leave the convent, with Maria's permission, so she could fully embrace a new chapter in her life. Daniel prepared his cabin in the mountains to welcome them both, making it comfortable, safe, and welcoming. They worked together to combine their belongings, their skills, and their hopes into a shared life. It was a simple life, grounded in nature and community, but filled with love, respect, and the promise of shared adventure. The day they officially began their life together was filled with quiet joy. Villagers gathered to celebrate, not with grandeur, but with warmth and kindness. Maria and Daniel stood together, holding hands, feeling the presence of everyone who had supported them. Children ran around, laughing, and the elderly smiled with satisfaction at the union of two people who had brought so much goodness into the community. The mountains stood silent, yet their majesty seemed to witness and bless the bond between the mountain man and the nun. Life together was not always easy. They faced challenges, the harsh winters, the unpredictable weather, and the demands of village life. But they faced these challenges as a team. Daniel's experience with survival in the mountains helped them navigate difficulties with calm and patience. Maria's wisdom, organization, and compassion ensured that their home and the lives of those around them remained balanced and harmonious. Each obstacle they faced only strengthened their bond, proving that their love was not just a fleeting feeling, but a deep and enduring partnership. They spent mornings tending the garden, harvesting crops, and feeding animals. Afternoons were often filled with helping villagers, repairing homes, or teaching children how to read and write. Evenings were quiet, filled with conversation, laughter, and the shared satisfaction of a day well spent. Maria taught Daniel about the plants in the garden, the rituals of the church, and the small joys of the village life. Daniel taught Maria about survival skills, the mountains, and the importance of patience and observation. Together, they balanced each other perfectly. As the years passed, their life together flourished. Maria and Daniel married quietly, surrounded by the villagers who had become like family. Their home was filled with warmth, laughter, and love. They had children who grew up learning the values their parents had shown: kindness, courage, patience, and care for the world around them. The mountain man and the nun had found not only love, but also a sense of belonging, both to each other and to the community that had accepted and supported them. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Maria and Daniel would sit outside their cabin, watching the sunset behind the mountains. They would hold hands, remembering the early days when they had first noticed each other, the glances that had seemed so awkward, the small acts of kindness that had grown into a profound connection. They would smile, knowing that life had brought them together in a way neither had expected, yet both had cherished from the beginning. Their story became a quiet legend in the village. People would speak of the nun who had once served quietly in the church, and the mountain man who had lived alone, distant and wary. They would tell how the two had met, how a simple glance had sparked curiosity, and how patient care, courage, and kindness had built a bond that endured through challenges and time. Maria and Daniel never sought fame or recognition. Their reward was the life they shared, the love they nurtured, and the community that had grown stronger through their presence. In the end, the journey of Maria and Daniel was not about dramatic events or extraordinary adventures. It was about quiet courage, steadfast care, and the willingness to open one's heart to connection. The nun had once warned the mountain man not to look at her in a certain way, and he had done so anyway, carefully and respectfully. That simple, human act had sparked a relationship that changed both their lives, proving that love often grows in unexpected ways and flourishes through patience, respect, and understanding. As the years continued, Maria and Daniel's life remained simple, fulfilling, and deeply connected. They taught their children the values they had lived by, guided the villagers with wisdom, and never forgot the small beginnings of their relationship. Each day they found joy in one another, in their home, and in the world around them. The mountains, once a symbol of solitude for Daniel, now stood as a reminder of the life he had built alongside Maria, a life full of love, purpose, and belonging. And so the nun and the mountain man, once strangers from different worlds, had built a life together. Their story was a quiet celebration of patience, kindness, courage, and the extraordinary ways that human hearts can connect. It showed that love is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it begins with a glance, grows through small acts, and blossoms into a lifetime of companionship, respect, and shared joy. The villagers would remember it for generations, not as a fairy tale, but as a true story of two people who found each other and chose to build a life full of meaning, love, and hope.